Yom Kippur, the holiest day on the Jewish calendar, is coming up this weekend. For those of us who observe, we will spend the day reflecting on our mistakes and wrongdoings of the last year, doing heartfelt repentance for them, and setting our intention for the year ahead. But what if you're not good at recognizing your own flaws and errors? How do you apologize for harmful actions if you don't even realize you've taken them? There are a number of psychological biases that reflect this very human inability to objectively take stock of ourselves, and I've especially noticed them hard at work over this past painful year. There's the blind spot bias, when a person is easily able to find fault in the thinking of others, but not their own, allowing them to subconsciously overlook any evidence that doesn't support their own already established ideas. Closely related is confirmation bias, where we give more weight to information that supports what we already believe, again, mistakenly thinking ourselves objective and fair. And now, I'd like to submit my own psychological fallacy into the mix, something I call shortcut empathy. I've observed that we, as a modern-day Western society, grossly over-exaggerate our natural ability to be empathetic, while at the same time underestimating the effort required to actually empathize. After all, we are living in the era of inclusion, of wellness training and trigger warnings, GoFundMes and preferred pronouns. As Joe Bluth says in my favorite show, Arrested Development, we're really nice now. Yet, all these positive behavioral shifts have, I believe, also come with a false sense of superiority. The thinking goes that if I embody this new societal ethos and support the right causes and think of myself as a generally good human, then I've checked all the boxes of a highly empathetic person, right? But in reality, none of those things are an automatic substitute for the actual work of empathizing. In fact, many of the folks who likely style themselves as the most empathetic are in fact the most calloused, unreasonable, and inflexible when it comes to Jews and Israel. Now, I do believe that intellectually, we in 2024 possess a greater sensitivity to the negative impact of harm. If we see or hear about something horrible, we say, oh my God, that's horrible, and we feel horrible. But that is not empathy. That's sympathy, which is lovely, but it's different, and it's not how you resolve conflict. To exhibit true empathy, we must adopt the process of the actor. We must imagine ourselves into a specific set of circumstances, using our own personal relationships as substitutes for the people involved to truly understand the feeling. We need to go there completely, body and soul, no matter how painful, especially when it's painful. We must close our eyes and literally play the scene in our minds. What would it look like, sound like, feel like, smell like if this were happening to me and my loved ones? So why don't more people do this? Well, number one, we're lazy. Doing this work takes energy and effort and care, and we got a lot of other stuff to do. Number two, I think there is a fear to go there, that somehow allowing ourselves to feel the pain and humanity of others weakens our own position or the righteousness of our cause. But in fact, the opposite is true, because it's only by allowing ourselves to truly feel the pain of others that we can verify the moral character of our own beliefs. About a year ago, I had the opportunity to appear on a YouTube show called Middle Ground, where I and 3 other Israel advocates sat across the table from 4 Palestinian Americans, and we agreed or disagreed with various prompts. As you might imagine, it was a very tense afternoon, but I did my best to engage in a spirit of middle ground, looking for ways to connect with and relate to the people across from me. I kept asking myself, if I were Palestinian American, can I honestly say that I'd think or feel any different? I'd like to think I'd still be able to hold space for the truth of the Jewish narrative, despite the primacy of my own narrative and my immense feelings of pain and futility. But I also recognize that I'm a human being, fallible as any other, so maybe not. It was in that spirit of grace and understanding that I reached out to one of the women across the table from me after the show. She seemed the most familiar to me. A person who, if she had been born Jewish, would maybe sound like me, and if I were born Palestinian, maybe I'd sound like her. So we met up for lunch and just got to know each other as human beings. I felt proud, honestly, and reinforced in my belief that empathy doesn't have to mean agreement, that understanding does not mean capitulation, but rather an open door to conversation. Then, in the wake of October 7th, this woman posted a video on her Instagram in full support of Hamas, calling their atrocities justifiable and their resistance a human right. I felt sick to my stomach, and I felt I had to respond. So I carefully composed a personal text. Quick tip, never do the heavy convos on social media. But before I wrote it, I practiced some empathy. I really tried to put myself in her shoes and asked myself if I felt my people were being slaughtered and oppressed and nothing was working, would I too come to the conclusion that all means are justified? I could feel her anger, disillusionment, and desperation. But still, I knew the answer to my question was a resounding no. And I know this because I've heard the equivalent on the Jewish side. They want to support Hamas, they all deserve to go. And that's not who I am. There are lines I will never be willing to cross. And yet, because of my empathy, I was able to reach out to her from a place of calm and moral clarity, having genuinely tried to understand her. She never responded to my text and has since spent the last year using her social media to express support for terrorists and hate for Israel. But it doesn't get under my skin because I know that not only is she wrong, but I did my part in trying to connect, so I could let it go. Which brings me back to shortcut empathy. We have to do better and push ourselves to do the hard work of the real thing, not just because it's right, but because it makes us better people, more open to connection and cooperation with folks who are different from us. The only way forward is together. This is the 4th episode of Being Jewish with me, Jonah Platt. My guest today is a special one. He officiated my bar mitzvah and my wedding and those of my siblings. I think he officiated my bris. I don't remember. I was pretty young. Maybe you can clear that up. And if that weren't enough, he's a best-selling author, a fixture in both print and television news media, a vaunted scholar, and the Rabbi Emeritus of Sinai Temple in Los Angeles. Newsweek called him the most influential rabbi in America. Welcome, Rabbi David Wolpe.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Remember your bris very well.
So what? I thought so. Good. That makes one of us.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to start back at the beginning. You grew up the son of a rabbi.
Yep.
I feel like kids who grow up with a rabbi parent are either junior rabbis or rebels as kids. Which one were you?
I was actually both. I started off as the rebel and then ended up as the rabbi. I mean, if you'd asked me when I was a kid, what do you want to do? I would say, I'm not sure. I think I want to be a writer. But one thing I know is I don't want to be a rabbi.
Right.
And then I ended up being a rabbi. So it's a very influential thing to be as a parent, partly because one of the things I do remember as a kid is when my father spoke, all the other parents listened. And that's a really powerful thing for a kid to see. So that affects you in different ways.
And did you always feel ownership of your own Jewish identity, or did it feel like it was an extension of your father's?
It was definitely, we were part of like a corporation. You know, I had 3 brothers, so we were the rabbi's family.
Right.
And it took a while for me to, I guess, figure out what my own voice was. But I must say, even to this day, sometimes when I'm speaking, I hear my father come out of me. So I'm not sure I ever completely individuated from that, but yeah. I
think that's pretty normal for any father-son relationship.
It's probably true, especially if you're lucky enough to have a really good father, and I had a really, really good father.
So hearing about your really good father, what's one of the best things about being a rabbi's kid, and what's one of the worst things?
The worst thing is that people assume you are what you're not. That is, like, I would go to people's houses and I would be 6 or 7 years old and they would say, "What's your name, David Wolpe? Are you Rabbi Wolpe's son?" "Yes." And they would say, "I used to keep kosher." And I would think, I'm 6 years old, lady. I don't care. I was like, take it up with my father. And sometimes that affects your peers too, that they see you as a rabbi's kid. The thing that was good about it was that I think if you're lucky enough to be the child of a rabbi who is well thought of by his community, there's a real sense of pride in being the rabbi's kid.
That's so nice.
So yeah, and I felt that.
And what role did your mother and your brothers play in shaping your Jewish identity?
So my mother was the person that I sat next to in synagogue. So in some ways, I mean, not only did she make the home, but even my synagogue experience was in some ways more about my mother than my father.
Right.
Although my mother was also the person who I think was responsible for my sense of public self, because my mother cared a lot about how, like, that we were dressed right when we walked into synagogue.
Got a lot of eyes on you.
And yes, and believe me, when someone walked in who wasn't dressed the way she thought they should be, my mother was not shy about letting that be known with an eye roll or a look.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
What was one of your favorite Jewish family traditions in your house?
It was easy, hands down. Friday night was our favorite. Like, everybody was always at the Friday night dinner table. We always argued about something.
Mm-hmm.
And whoever made everybody else laugh won.
Nice.
It was like definitely that's how we all became, like, you know, used to making jokes in conversations and so on.
This podcast could, like, basically be called I Love Shabbat. Like, every guest comes in, like, their favorite thing is Shabbat. It's really a beautiful gift.
Great. It was great.
Okay, so when and how and why do you decide to become a rabbi?
It's kind of a bizarre story in the sense that I was still very much attached to Judaism, and I was at Camp Ramah, and I had graduated college, and I had spent a year writing, and I was going to continue writing and try to publish something. And Elliot Dorff, who was a rabbi who taught and still teaches at what's now called American Jewish University, said to me, "What do you want to do with your life?" And I said, "Elliot, I know that you spend your time talking to people to go to rabbinical school. I grew up with her. I know what it is. I want to be a writer." He said, "Well, what do you want to write about?" I said, I don't know. I don't really know anything. I just always knew that I wanted to write. And he said, "How about if you go to rabbinical school for a year? You're not doing anything. The worst that happens is you'll learn something. And the best that happens is you'll find your subject." And I said, "Okay," just like that. And that was it. And I went to rabbinical school and I loved it.
Wow.
And he was right. I think what was important here was that it wasn't my father asking. Because as much as I loved my father, had he said, "Why don't you go to rabbinical school?" I think I would have said no.
Like, I got to do my own thing.
Exactly.
And I totally understand that. Have your reasons for continuing to be a rabbi always been the same as why you became one in the first place?
I think not. I started off being a rabbi because I really loved studying and learning and writing. And because I'm a little bit asocial, by which I mean, like, my default is to sit in a room and read a book. My default is not to go out to a dinner party. And in fact, one of the nice things about being a rabbi is because you are supposed to be social, it forces me out of what would normally be a lot less interactive. But because of that, that's what I thought I would do. I would be at a university and I would teach, and then I would go home and I would read and I would study and I would go back and teach. And then when I went to a synagogue, which happened because we were going to have a child and I was doing a lot of traveling, and we thought it's better to be in one place at one time, I realized how much I actually got out of doing things like weddings and funerals and bar and bat mitzvahs. And it didn't change who I was. Like, if you said to me tonight, "Do you want to go do the wedding or do you want to sit at home and read?" I would definitely go for sit at home and read. But then when I did the wedding, I would say, actually, that was really, I really enjoyed that.
What do you love about being a part of those life moments?
Well, it depends which life moment. For a wedding, it's just kind of a high. There's just joy, and it's like you get to be a part of that joy and you get to contribute to it, and that's great. For a funeral, it is much more of a sense of being needed, because I remember my father saying to me, "You can skimp on anything except a eulogy." He said, "You give a bad sermon, you'll give a better sermon next week. You give a bad wedding talk, they're still married.
Right.
Nobody's going to say the wedding was ruined because the rabbi didn't give a good talk because they got married. But people will never forget what you say at their loved one's funeral."
Right.
So I work hard at that. And I really think when you get it right, there's an enormous sense of satisfaction that you were able to sum up this person's life for the people who needed that to be done. So,
and I can attest to your skill at that. recently when you spoke at about a year ago at my friend Mark's funeral.
And so did you.
And so did I.
Very beautifully.
Thank you. And
you
encapsulated him so well.
So that matters.
Yeah.
And when you do something that's important and that it matters and it works, it's a wonderful feeling, even though it's obviously a very sad.
Right.
Yeah.
So you were the senior rabbi at Sinai Temple for many, many years. How long?
26 years.
26 years. In what ways do you feel like you left it stronger than when you arrived?
Well, when I arrived, it was actually not in very good shape. They'd had a series of unsuccessful rabbinic figures. The last 5 or 6 had all left after a relatively short time or before they were supposed to. So first of all, just the fact that they had a stable leader for a long time. In fact, when I was going to go there, my father didn't want me to go. He said he heard it was an Eretz Ochel et Yoshveha, which is the Hebrew phrase that means a land that eats its own.
Los Angeles or the synagogue?
No, Sinai.
Oh, boy.
That's what they had said. That's what the spies say about Canaan, about Canaan in the Bible. And he'd heard terrible things about Sinai. It's like every rabbi he said, so I really don't want you to go. And I went anyway, obviously. But I think the first thing was that actually this is a successful and stable and decent congregation, and you can keep a rabbi for a long time if it's the right match. And I think there was much more of a divide than there is now between the Persian and non-Persian members of the congregation. That took a lot of work and a lot of time, but I thought that also strengthened the shul a lot.
How did that, dichotomy affect your time there? I mean, it was probably pretty central to it.
It was pretty central because the two populations were really antagonistic towards each other. Not everybody, obviously, but many of them. And it was for really very understandable reasons on both sides. You have a synagogue and like you have a country or anything else, and all of a sudden a huge population comes in that speaks a different language, has different ways of being, and has different cultural patterns, and says, your home is my home, so we're here now too. And you're like, but what about all the things I was used to that have changed? And what about the fact that you're speaking a language in my own home that I don't understand? And so the Ashkenazi population felt put upon. And the Persian population felt we just ran away from our country. We came here with almost nothing. We're also Jews, and this is our refuge, and you're telling us like that we're not wanted. And so the way that you bring them together is to let both understand how the other one is feeling.
How do you do that?
By telling them. Honestly, I gave a sermon saying many of the things that I just said and talking about how we were now going to create like various groups and dinners at each other's homes and so on. So not so that you can become the same, but just so that you can appreciate who each of you are. And I think that over time that got, first of all, the Persian population got much more used to being in Los Angeles, were less afraid, felt less prejudiced from Los Angeles in general, because when they first came, what the average person on the street thought about them was they're from Iran. And we hated Iran at the time. It was right after the hostage crisis and so on. And then for the Ashkenazi population, they felt like much more comforted, accepted, went to each other's bar and bat mitzvahs and weddings. And it just, both time and effort like helped. So
I think could probably still use a little more help.
Can always use more help. It's always hard to keep populations that are different, unantagonistic towards each other in certain ways. It's never a perfect solution, which is why all over the world, immigration is such a touchy issue.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite parsha?
I mean, I do, but it's not really fair. It's my bar mitzvah portion was Genesis. So
that's a good one.
It's a really good one. It's the creation of the world. It's Adam and Eve. It's a lot of good stuff. So I got to say that that's my favorite, but it just for obvious reasons.
That's birds. No, you didn't have one of the leprosy ones.
Exactly. I was very lucky.
In your eyes, not necessarily in the congregation's eyes, but what in your eyes were one or two of the most important sermons that you gave?
I think that the most important ones were First of all, that Persian Ashkenazi sermon, no question about it. At the time, it was a huge, obviously the one that made the biggest stir of a single sermon was one where I said the Exodus didn't happen the way the Bible said,
right?
Which I still hear about all the time. And then probably, it wasn't exactly a sermon, but there was a morning during the Second Intifada when we raised millions of dollars on a Shabbat morning.
Wow.
And I remember how I started, which was I said, imagine a cell phone, and the cell phone's in a backpack and it's ringing, but there's no one to answer. And that cell phone belongs to a child who was on his way to school, and the parents are calling, but the child will never answer that phone. And I said we wanted to bring millions of dollars, as much as we could, to victims of terror to help people like those parents get over what happened, to the extent that it was even conceivable or possible.
Yeah.
And we ended up bringing $3 million to various terror victim groups. And that was a powerful experience.
That's amazing.
So it was.
You were very early in the Jewish community to say that you would officiate gay marriages when legalization of gay marriage happened. What was the reaction to that? And have you seen the Jewish community shift at all in that regard since those early days?
So the reaction was kind of explosive. Let me just explain what my thought was about timing. First of all, it ended up on the front page of the New York and the LA Times because there was such a reaction in the synagogue at the time. Because especially inside the Persian community, they were socially very conservative. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I couldn't do it until I had at least a couple of Persian parents whom I could then send other Persian parents to. Because you couldn't send them to Ashkenazi parents because they wouldn't trust them to understand what they were going through.
Right.
So once the first couple of very courageous young Persians came out and their parents had to deal with it, then I said, okay, now I can say, this is what we're going to do. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. Was Persian kids then came out to their parents, and the parents said, what do I do now? And I said, oh, well, you can go to this person and she'll tell you like what she went through and so on and so forth. Because there was so much, a lot of it was just the sense of shame in your community that the Ashkenazim didn't have as much. It was so much more accepted in the non-Persian community that when Ashkenazi parents had kids who were gay, it wasn't like they thought, oh my God, all my friends are going to think, what did you do?
Right.
But in the Persian community, that's what it was like. Mm-hmm. And so it took work.
Makes sense. How do you maintain your sense of self while being devoted to such a large community?
It's very difficult because the weird dynamic of a lot of rabbis is you're telling other people to live a life of family and you don't, because you're always at I used to say, I spend my life living other people's lives.
Right.
I would go to their simchas. And the thing is, if it's a small shul, it's different. In a big synagogue, I mean, you can only be really close to a handful of families. So a lot of the time, you were the pivotal person for a family that you didn't really know, but they felt like they knew you.
Right.
And that's both a privilege, but also not always easy.
So the real reason why I had you on to being Jewish is because you wrote a book called Why Be Jewish? Right. So I had to have you on, which, I actually received that book as a temple gift for my bar mitzvah.
I know.
So in it, you say Judaism's most important single teaching is that each human being is created in the image of God. Yeah. Why is that the most important thing?
It enables you to understand that even people that you dismiss, dislike, think are foolish, think are enemies, think are whatever, have the same essential worth that you do. There's no such thing as a worthless human being. And it's so easy, especially now we're in essentially wartime, it's so easy to think that their lives are not worth as much as ours. And that's easy to do with any difference. I mean, throughout history, people have done it with race, with religion, with ethnicity, with nationality. It's always, if you're not like me, you don't count as much as me. And really, Judaism, I see, came into the world to insist that that is not true. And it, as far as I know, is the only real universal principle that ties all human beings together, right? It's not genetics. No, it's the fact that we have the image of God in us. And I think if that were universally believed, the world would be an infinitely better place.
I know that's true.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile that idea with someone who is, truly evil, a mass murderer?
The way I reconcile it is that's why we call them evil. Because when a lion does something, you don't say that's an evil lion.
Right.
The only reason that someone terrible is evil is because they have the image of God in them and betray it so horribly. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to call them evil.
I like that. You also wrote in the book, if you wish to know the character of a people, look to its heroes. Who should be our heroes?
The thing about Jewish heroes that makes them, especially biblical heroes, that makes them distinctive is they're all flawed. They're all flawed. Like, we don't have any perfect people. There's nobody in the Bible you can't criticize. You criticize Moses, you criticize Abraham, you criticize Sarah, you criticize everyone.
Right.
I wrote a book about King David. God knows there is a lot in King David to criticize.
Yeah.
So I would say that the important thing about having a hero is not to make them perfect. To say, given the limitations and flaws of being human, they still did great and good things. And all the people I just mentioned did that. And so I'm bullish on heroes that are imperfect,
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, so I actually got a lot of people who wanted me to talk about this subject that I'm about to with you, which is your time at Harvard in the past year. A lot of interest. So you retired as senior rabbi, and you were a visiting professor at Harvard University in the Divinity School.
Yes.
So first, how did you find the Divinity School itself to be?
I'm going to start with a caveat that every place at Harvard has wonderful people, profound scholars, interesting thinkers, and there's no place that is absent of that, certainly including the Divinity School. But I think that it was also a place that was deeply unsympathetic to what we might call mainstream Jewry, and certainly to Israel.
That's unfortunate to discover. So you happened to be at Harvard the year there was this enormous explosion of anti-Jew bigotry. You've taught at other universities before. Was there ever any indication that this kind of anti-Jewish hate was brewing in higher education, or this a brand new phenomenon?
No, it wasn't a brand new phenomenon. I mean, at Harvard already, it was known. When I was going to Harvard, people asked me if I thought I would encounter it. And it's a combination of a lot of different factors. One is, remember that, especially the Divinity School, but Harvard, like a lot of universities, has a long history of Protestant Christianity, which was sometimes very hostile to Judaism. So some of the germs of that hostility existed institutionally. That's one thing. The second is that with the increase of students who came from the Middle East, where there's a lot of anti-Semitism, and money that came from the Middle East, which was promoting programs that were hostile to Israel, that fostered that same lack of sympathy certainly for Zionism and also as a corollary to Jews. So no, I don't think that it's entirely surprising, although the explosion of it and the force of it and the breadth of it was shocking.
Yeah. So while all this is happening, this explosion of anti-Jewish hate, you're asked by the then president, Claudine Gay of the school, to serve on this anti-Semitism commission,
right?
From which you ended up resigning after how long?
Couple months.
Because as you've said, you felt like the whole thing was a cover for Harvard and they had no intention of listening or doing anything. Right. What specifically did you encounter while serving on the commission? Like what were the red flags that led you to resign?
This actually gives me a chance to tell you my favorite line ever from TV.
Great.
Which is from BoJack Horseman.
A brilliant show.
Somewhere in BoJack Horseman, they say, if you're wearing rose-colored glasses, all red flags look like flags, which is really brilliant.
Yeah.
I heard that. I thought that is fantastic. And so when I started off, people told me this is not real, but I was like new to Harvard and I was a little bit wearing rose-colored glasses. I thought you got to give it a chance.
Sure.
The people on the Anti-Semitism Committee were wonderful. And we developed recommendations and proposals. And no matter how often we would recommend stuff, nothing was happening. And at a certain point, a core of us, 4 or 5 of us, wrote a resignation letter. And we were helped very much, and I want to give him credit, by the advice of Larry Summers, who was a past president of Harvard, among his many other distinctions. And we delivered the resignation letter. And that was the only time a member of the corporation showed up. The corporation is the group that runs Harvard.
Right.
So she showed up. All the meetings were on Zoom, and said, please don't resign. We have a plan. We're really getting started, and so on and so forth. And we said, okay, we'll give you a chance. So it wasn't as though David Wolpe thought nothing was happening, but the other members of the commission thought it was great.
Right.
We all saw the same thing.
Okay.
And then the hearings happened.
The congressional hearings.
The congressional hearings where the 3 presidents, whatever the opposite of distinguished yourself is,
right,
very much undistinguished themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like after that, it was almost embarrassing to still pretend that we were doing anything. So I called the president, or actually she called me, and I told her, I said, look, I know that you're in an impossible position, because it was very hard to know how to handle this.
It's very gracious of you to say.
I said, but I'm also in an impossible position. I just regret that my getting out of my impossible position is going to make yours harder.
Mm.
She asked, what could we do? And I gave her all the recommendations that we'd said, and it was clear that they were not going to happen. And so the next day I spoke to the other members of the committee. Next day I resigned. I really didn't think that it was going to get millions and millions and millions of views, but it did, because I think there was an enormous pent-up frustration of why isn't anyone in this university standing up and saying the emperor has no clothes?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I did, people were relieved, I think.
When you say, you spoke to her directly,
Yeah.
and it was clear none of these recommendations were going to be taken, like, what was her response to you with them?
So I have a different interpretation of her conduct from many other people, which is the way you become president of a university. Some people said, for example, she was president of Harvard because she was a Black woman. And I think that's foolish, because there are a lot of Black women, and a lot of them are enormously accomplished. Why did this person get to be?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer usually for a position like that, which is not unlike a synagogue rabbi, is you get appointed because people like you.
Right.
But the trap of that is, if you're a person who's used to being liked and you have to take positions that will make people dislike you, it's very hard.
Mm.
So I think that she found it very difficult to take positions that the faculty would be angry at, that the board would be angry at, because these were her contemporaries and they all liked her and she liked them. And so, and especially at Harvard, I think the ideology, and not only hers, was, we're Harvard.
Right.
We'll be fine.
Yeah, we can do whatever.
We've been here for hundreds of years. And by the way, did I mention we're Harvard?
Right.
So there was a lot of that. And also the fact that she was getting, I'm sure, a lot of pressure from, we talk about Jewish donors, but there were hundreds of millions of dollars coming from places like Qatar,
right,
and other places in the Middle East. And those were also in peril. And I think you put all that together and it was going to be like, we will just wait until this storm dies down. And none of us were prepared for that.
It's interesting. The way you just described her is, you made me think of a lot of figures in entertainment and in social media, right, who have this fear of, they have this strong need to be liked. They have an insecurity about it. And they have this fear of upsetting people, upsetting their fans, and more important to them than doing what's right.
Let me just honestly, you could easily have done that. The tack that you've taken, a lot of the reason that people admire what you've done is because that by being so upfront about being Jewish at a time like this, you're going to get a lot of flack. So but the answer of this is not the way most people answer that. The way most people answer that is, that's why I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. Feels
kudos to you.
Thank you. I appreciate just doing what you got to do.
Right.
That's how I feel about it. So you said in a recent speech that DEI is broken. Can you elaborate on that thought and explain what role, if any, you felt DEI played at Harvard?
This is the ideology behind it. Societies are built in systems. Systems discriminate sometimes against certain groups, especially in America. There was redlining in housing. There was systematic discrimination against African Americans, so on. And therefore, if there's inequality among groups, it must not be because of merit. It must be because the system is broken. Mm-hmm. And if you fix the system right, you will get perfect equality among various groups. The problem is the system can be broken, but you're still not going to get perfect equality when you fix it among various groups because, and this is the metaphor I used, the only way you get an even lawn is with a lawnmower. It doesn't matter how much fertilizer you throw on a lawn, it's not going to become even. And the same thing's true with people. The only way you get equality of outcome is if you cut down the top, not if you incentivize the bottom. Because cutting down the top will make sure that everybody only reaches this level. So if you're a small group that overachieves, you're going to get it in the neck. And a small group that overachieves is another way of it's like a synonym for Jews.
Right.
And therefore, the view of the Jewish people was not, look, you have unusual merit and we want to encourage that because it's good for the world.
Right.
It was, you have achieved unusual outcomes. Therefore, there obviously is something unfair about the position that you occupy in society. And so when you say, no, but actually, don't you know that in the lifetime of people who are still walking this earth, a third of all the Jews in the world were killed.
Right.
We actually don't come from a position of privilege. This has been a real struggle to get here. It does not accord with the life experience of most of the people at Harvard who the only Jews they know are Jews who are successful and Jews who have not had terrible hardships in their own individual lives.
Right.
And so there is this tremendous gap between the reality and what the perception is. And most DEI is built on that perception. My own take on it is DEI should be adversity-based, not race-based. If you make it adversity-based, it will disproportionately be people of color in our society because disproportionately people of color have faced adversity in growing up, but also the white kid from Appalachia
right.
whose parents were opioid addicts and has never gone to school will also get help through DEI, even though he doesn't have a race-based claim, but he has an adversity claim. And that's what I would hope for, is that we would see adversity as the standard by which we have to help people.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to current Jewish students right now navigating anti-Jewish racism on campus?
I actually literally just wrote this morning for the ADL. I think the first thing to know is that you're not alone, that the Jewish community really wants to support you, that Chabad, Hillel, ADL, your rabbi, your synagogue, so on, all of them stand with you. You aren't alone.
Yeah.
And second is to recognize that a lot of this comes from ignorance and not hatred. And that what you think of as, oh, this person hates me, they probably know really as much about Israel as you know about like Nagorno-Karabakh.
I don't even know what words you just said.
Exactly. So sometimes it's really important to recognize that just because something is important to you, someone else, it may be important to them for a second because it's on social media, but they don't really know about it or care about it. And also you have to find, like you do in every place in life, you have to find people who share your values and you care about, because without some kind of social circle, you're really, it will be very difficult.
Yeah. So usually on this show, I aim to have Jews or non-Jewish allies who are known for their work in other fields, and I offer them this chance to open up about the connection to Jewishness. You are unique in that you are obviously a Jewish professional of the highest order. So I want to take this opportunity to tap into some rabbinic wisdom since I got you here.
Sure.
So you have emphasized the importance of Jews seeking God.
Yes.
How can individuals, Jewish or not, cultivate a deeper relationship with the divine in their everyday lives?
Well, the first way is to want it. And then there are usually the way that people go about seeking God is through nature. Some people find it, you can find it in the woods, in the mountain, in the river, in the stars, through community, other people who care about that. Like sometimes you have an experience of something transcendent when you sing with other people that you don't get any other way.
Right.
And in synagogue, you sing together. There aren't that many places in American society where people actually get to sing together. And then there is study. There are beautiful books and texts and so on that can really elevate people and make them feel differently about the world. I always tell people that books like Heschel's The Sabbath or Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning are books that really elevate your spirit and allow you to find parts of yourself that otherwise you wouldn't know.
Is believing in God a requirement for being Jewish?
No, it's not a requirement for being Jewish. I mean, our name Yisrael means struggling with God.
Right.
If you struggle with it, if you think about it, if you are like Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav beautifully said, he said, I'm a moon man. My faith waxes and wanes. You know, sometimes it shines bright, sometimes it's dark. If it matters to you, and I think it should, then I think you're right in the mainstream of the Jewish tradition. The
important thing is to just be struggling, be in the mix.
Is that you're not indifferent to it.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of that struggle, yesterday, that was my bar mitzvah portion, was Jacob wrestling with the angel. Talked all about struggle.
Yeah.
As a clergyman, is there any distinction in your connection to being Jewish between the religious piece and the nation personhood piece, or is it just one and the same for you?
I mean, Herzl was a great Jew. He was not at all religious.
Right.
But obviously his effect on the Jewish tradition was much more profound than a lot of religious Jews.
Sure.
So I see the distinction. I don't live it in my own life, but I certainly appreciate it.
Okay. So you were the person who gave my wife, Courtney, weekly shout out to Courtney. You gave her and me the confidence to have tattoos as Jews. So can you please explain for my audience the kosherness of tattoos?
Yes. Okay. So I didn't know you were going to put me in this. Now I'm in trouble with every Jewish parent who is watching the show. So here's the story. Like, the only thing that most Jews know about tattoos is not true.
Right.
Which is that you're not allowed to be buried in a Jewish cemetery if you get a tattoo. And that's totally false.
Totally false.
It is. No Jewish authority has ever said that. I mean, just think about it. Like, yes, if you break the Sabbath, if you murder someone, you can be buried in it, but get a tattoo,
right.
You're out. And I don't know where it started, but if you don't believe me, just Google, can you be buried? And you'll see that that's not true.
It was some mom who didn't want their kid getting a tattoo. Yeah.
So the issue with a tattoo is this. You are not allowed to deface your body. And the reason you're not allowed to is that your body is a gift.
It's on loan.
Right. You have to return it. So if you see, for example, piercing your ear for an earring as a defacement, you shouldn't do it. But if you see it as an enhancement to beauty, then it's permitted. If you see a tattoo as an enhancement to beauty, then I think there's a very good argument why you could get a tattoo, because it's not defacing your body.
That's
By
actually...
the way, I don't have any tattoos in case...
So this is a good segue to my next question. How do you balance which laws and rituals should continue to be upheld in 2024 and what can we leave to history?
I think that there are certain Jewish laws that we ought to recognize no longer apply. I mean, I think it would be wonderful to have a third temple. I do not want to sacrifice animals there, especially as a vegetarian. So I think that the way you do this is organically in community. That is, you create communities that value this or that or the other. And that's why it's really good that Jews don't have a hierarchy, because there isn't a Pope Jew who can say, this is a law that you cannot change. Instead, there are different kinds of communities of Jews. And I think increasingly that will be true. As mainstream institutions speak less to younger people, and I think they do, younger people will create their own kinds of institutions that speak more to them.
Right.
And that's just the way
based on their own values and priorities.
Yep.
What's your perspective on the role of Israel in Jewish identity?
I think that people who don't think it's central don't realize how central it would be if they didn't have it. Like a lot of things, you don't know how much modern Jewish identity is buttressed by the reality that we have a state. And if it were, God forbid, 1,000 times if it were gone, it would be an incomparable loss to everyone's sense of Jewish identity, even those people who think they don't want it to be there. I really believe that.
What do you say to the Jew who identifies as Jewish strongly and thinks Israel should not exist?
I actually don't start the conversation by saying anything.
Right.
I start the conversation by asking them why and asking them to tell me more and trying to understand how they could come to that weirdly anomalous position of believing in a tradition whose sacred scripture is all about getting to the land, whose prayers constantly mention being in the land, whose holidays talk about living in the land next year and say that I'm actually part of this tradition, but I don't think the land piece is part of it. And so I guess once I understand that, I know better how to figure out how they could hold those positions at the same time, because the truth is that from my point of view, they either deeply misunderstand Judaism or deeply misunderstand Israel.
Does it, diminish their standing as a Jew in some way, or is it?
I'm not. I don't give out the cards,
right?
About who gets into heaven, what your standing is as a Jew. I think that it makes it very difficult for the mainstream Jewish community to embrace them, because here we are in a real existential struggle for the life of 6 or 7 million of our brethren, the majority of the Jews in the world. And here's somebody who claims to stand with us who does not at all stand with us.
Right.
So in that sense, I think it's hard for the community to say, we don't judge you in any way.
Right.
Yeah.
So this episode's going to air during a period of the Jewish calendar called the Days of Awe.
Right.
What are the Days of Awe?
They're the days in which self-examination of yourself and your deeds and your relationship to God are paramount. And what you're looking for, I'll go back to your Torah portion, because I thought of this when you said it. It's like when Jacob's wrestling with the angel, and then the dawn is breaking, and he says to the angel, "Bless me." What the angel says is, "What's your name?" And he says, "Jacob." Because the last time he was asked his name, he lied about it. He said, "I'm Esau." So the angel wants to know that he's really going to fess up to who he is. And then he says, "Your name is no longer Jacob, now it's Israel." And I've thought about that a lot, because in my life as a rabbi, people often ask me for blessings. And what do they want? They want like health, success, children.
Comfort from the rabbi.
If I ever said to someone, "Here's a blessing, your name is no longer Jonah, it's Fred,"
Right.
They would say, "That's not a blessing." But the idea, of course, is what the angel's blessing him with is self-transcendence, that in the next year, you don't have to be the same person that you were last year. You can be better.
It feels significant to me that the first anniversary of October 7th is falling during these Days of Awe. What do you make of that?
I think that the same thing is true for the Jewish people and for the world, that we have to really take a hard look at what we did wrong and what we did right in this year. And even as we remember that there was a tremendous loss of innocent life and there are hostages still in Gaza, and it's been an incredibly painful year on so many fronts. As human beings and as Jews and as citizens of the world, I think we could all do better.
Always.
Yeah.
How, if at all, has your connection to being Jewish changed since October 7th?
I think that I have gotten a little bit more binary, because I really feel the peril of, in a way that I didn't before, because of the explosion of anti-Semitism and hostility towards Israel. I have, I think, less bandwidth for people who I think don't have some sympathy both for my people and for the land of Israel. I'm sorry that that's true, but I think that the part of having principles is also having limits, and boundaries are important to life as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my boundaries in certain ways have hardened.
Makes sense. As I mentioned, this coming weekend after this airs is Yom Kippur, where we repent for our sins so that they can be wiped out and will be inscribed in the book of life. Do you really believe that we can control our own destiny in such a linear way?
No. But I do believe what the Unatan Tokef says, which is the prayer where it says, who shall live and who shall die, and who by this and who by that, and so on. And then it says, but Tefillah, tshuva, and tzedakah, prayer, repentance, and charity, can avert the severity of the decree. The decree is death. Everybody's going to die. But the legacy you leave, how you die, that actually is in your hands. And I think that that's more the lesson of Yom Kippur than you're not going to get inscribed in the book of life every year. Sooner or later, you won't.
Right.
But how you get inscribed in the book of memory, that's really up to you. And I know, having done now many, many funerals, that how you get inscribed in the book of memory has to do with how the people who are close to you have experienced you in life.
Mm-hmm. That's a great thought to take into the holiday. Okay. Tell me the truth.
Yeah.
Do you drink water on Yom Kippur? Because you stand up there and talk for a lot of hours.
No, I don't drink.
That's very impressive.
It's actually not
you're just talking and talking all day long.
It's much easier to be a rabbi on Yom Kippur than to be a congregant.
Because you're in the flow. You're in the zone.
Because I have something to do. I've always got something to do. I don't have that much time to think about it. The people who amaze me are not the rabbis, because I can keep quiet for a while.
The cantors.
The cantors, I don't know. I don't ask, but I can't imagine the cantors go. For 25 hours, they sing, and they never take a sip of water. It's like inconceivable to me.
We've been talking for an hour. I drank a whole glass of water.
I know.
It's crazy
I know,
to me.
but you really do. But when you're a congregant, I don't know how congregants fast.
You sleep in as late as possible before you show up. You got to give yourself a head start.
Yeah.
All right. So now we're going to do a little segment where we take questions from our Instagram audience.
Okay.
They've left some questions for you.
Sure.
Actually, this first question is not from Instagram. It's from my story producer, Sean, but I really liked it, so we included it. If you could invite any historical figure to Shabbat dinner, who would it be, and what do you think they'd find most surprising about modern Jewish life?
King David. Because I wrote a book about him and because he fascinates me, I got to say. And I think he would find what he would probably find most remarkable is that we still invoke him like thousands of years later.
Yeah, I think about that a lot with people like Mozart. It's
we're talking like 3,000 years later. Really? I'm still like on the books?
Pretty cool.
That is pretty amazing. Right. Because he was a king in like a little part of a little, in the world. And, and like all these people that he fought with, they're gone. And we still talk about him. So, yeah.
Oren G18, shout out to my camp buddy Oren. He asks, who is Rabbi Wolpe's rabbi?
For many, many years, it was my father. Now I don't so much have a rabbi as I have good friends that I talk to. So, yeah.
That provide you wisdom and counsel.
Exactly. Yep.
Another camp buddy, shout out at Rube T. He has a few questions. First, he asks, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
When I was going off to rabbinical school, my father said to me, when you get there, there's going to be something called the development department. Mm-hmm. He said, they're the people that raise money.
Right.
They, I'm sure, have students go out and speak for the school. Go to the development department and tell them, you probably have students speak for the school. I'd like to be that student. He said, you will get experience speaking to 10 people and to 1,000 people. You'll get to know the entire community. You'll get to know the people who raise money and the people who have money, the people who support Jewish institutions. And in fact, it's exactly what I did. And now every time I talk to college students, I tell them to do the same thing. Say, if you want a career where you're going to be in front of other people, go to the development department of your college and say, I would like to represent the college. And it was great advice.
Wow.
Yeah.
You got vocational training.
Exactly. Yep.
Second question from Ruben. How do you get Jewish kids not to spoil Santa Claus for their non-Jewish friends?
This is a question to which I have given no thought.
Yeah, right? We got you on the spot on this one.
Exactly. I would say it's the only way to do it is to tell them, don't spoil Santa Claus for your non-Jewish
friends. Don't be a spoil sport.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, do you know that Mel Brooks routine about tearing paper?
No.
Oh, so Mel Brooks has this routine about it. He said he went to a psychiatrist because he was compulsively tearing paper. He said, and he cured me. He said, so Carl Reiner says, what do you do? He said, don't tear paper. So the same thing, like, don't spoil Santa. Just don't do it.
Love it.
Yeah.
And Ruben's last question, was Jonah a good altar boy?
Jonah was a really wonderful, look, I will tell the story. Jonah is the only person, I think, in my congregation who at age, 15, 14?
Younger, I feel like.
Was
right?
it younger, 13?
Around bar mitzvah
Like
age,
we
right?
walked around the block and talked like about Jewish philosophy and Jewish ideas and Jewish belief because you really had questions. And that was, so you weren't an altar boy, but you were a great young man.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
I feel like we got to end it there.
That's right.
You know, I'm going to go out on a high note.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for being here.
It's been a great pleasure.
This has been so enlightening on so many levels.
It's like walking around the block again.
There you go. I love it.